Asia Tingling, the Honorable Asia Tingling. I am a civil court judge. I am the third generation judge in my family. My father was a Supreme Court Justice, Milton A. Tingling. My grandfather, Milton F. Tingling, was also a civil court judge. So I am now the third. Currently, I am assigned to family court, where I hear matters of custody, visitation, and orders of protection. I had very limited experience in family matters before I was assigned here, but I have come to grasp this area of law, and I quite enjoy helping people to decide, their issues of custody, visitation, and how they're going to co-parent their children. We had a lot of fun growing up. Both of my parents are very easygoing parents to some degree. Education was stressed, but it wasn't overpowering. And I actually grew up in two households. My parents were not together, so I spent time with my father on the weekends, and at one point I lived with him for a while. And in terms of the law, it wasn't an ever-present thing in the house. That was just, to me, that was his job. That's what he did. But at home, he was dad. So there was never, what some people may think, any pressure to follow in anyone's footsteps. I don't think that he ever thought that he would be a judge. So I definitely did not think that I would ever be a judge. Actually, I wanted to be a singer. I really liked singing. I would enter into talent shows. My father both of my parents loved music. So my mom always played music when she was cleaning the house. And at my father's house, he would always, Tuesdays I think were the days that new records came out, new vinyls, what they call vinyls, but records to us. So he would always bring home new records, we would sing, and one of our pastimes back then we had the cassette tapes, so we would record songs and make mixtapes. And we had figured out how to press the pause button just right before the record went to the next song. And I would sing the songs, or I would just sing songs all the time. To get the broom, put on shows, whether someone was watching or not. That's what I wanted to do. As I grew up and I saw that singing was not going to be an option because I had severe stage fright. Just you freeze up and it's like nothing's coming out. I had always enjoyed working with children. So all of the jobs that I had from a teenager before I went to law school were with children. I worked in daycare centers, summer camps, and then when I went to college, I actually studied elementary education. So I was an elementary school teacher for 2 years before I decided to go to law school. I went to Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland. Well, in family court, we're assigned to a part, so we're in one place every day, all day for the duration of your assignment. So a typical day, you come in, I usually start my cases about 9:30, 10 o'clock, and then we run through the day until 4:30. And it's every day. It's busy every day. Back-to-back cases every half an hour. So we are, at least here, we are judges, we are social workers, we are counselors, we are mediators, we are therapists to some degree. I haven't dealt too much with life or death decision making, but a lot of the decisions that parents are unable to make directly affect their children. So the goal is to try to get them, one, to level the playing field, because one parent usually has more leverage over the other, or at least they think they do. And if I can try to get them to an even playing field and they see that they are equals, they're a little more amenable to compromising, hopefully, sometimes. But so the goal really is to get them to come up with their own schedule and how they want to see themselves co-parenting before I impose my decisions on them. Family court can be very emotionally taxing because you are dealing with the actual people as opposed to just attorneys. So when you have all those different energies, even if all of your cases go smoothly throughout a day, you can still be emotionally and physically drained from the talking, the mental exercises that you're doing and coming up with these orders, quickly. I do enjoy being here, probably more than others, even though some of the issues, again, can seem very minute. But I like being able to actually talk to the people who need the help and help them, or at least get them to somewhere where they don't need a middle person. So I do enjoy being here. I would like to preside over other types of cases, but for the time being, I enjoy being here. I think I've been here as a civil court judge. I've been here probably a little longer than most other people. But I do like it. I enjoy it very much. My father became a judge, I think my first year of college. So I was able to experience him being a judge a little more because I was older and I had a better understanding of what he did. The majority of the cases that I preside over are somewhat similar in nature. I mean, one parent is fighting for custody and the other parent either wants custody or just wants to be able to spend time with their child or children. Because every case has its own set of facts, it has its own unique complications. It's like, come on guys, you can't figure this out, it's your kid. What are we doing here? And it's almost every case is like that. It's like you got to come to some happy medium, because I'm not going to be here to walk you through this for the next 13, 14 years. Typically, they're represented by counsel. They are in family court. They are entitled to representation if they can't afford their own attorney, and most people can't afford their own attorney here, so they're entitled to assigned counsel. So with people who are not sure if they want to be represented, I kind of encourage them to do so, especially if the other side has representation, so that at the end, they can't say that they were manipulated or led in the wrong direction. And I also can't give them legal advice. So there's only but so much that I can tell them, that to kind of get them to a resolution. So it's encouraged that they are represented. Coming to court, especially in family court and in criminal court, can be extremely intimidating to some people. And many times when people call in, it's like, okay, so you filed the wrong petition, or this is not how it works. And the majority are like, I've never done this before, I don't know. And I'm like, I understand that. That's why I'm telling you that this isn't how it works. I'm going to tell you what you need to do, but I also recommend that you get counsel, because I'm not going to be able to do this for you throughout this case. Well, I've had mentors in my career as a lawyer who have helped to kind of shape how I see things, how you approach a case as a lawyer. One of the things I find being on the bench is, especially this early on, is that when you have practiced and then you go from practicing to being on the bench, it's a quick transition, and you have to turn off your lawyer hat in terms of wanting to advocate for one side or the other, or that, why didn't they ask this question? They should have did this. This is what they should be arguing. Why aren't they saying this? What's happening? I don't understand. And then to remember, that's not your job anymore. Your job is just to make the decision with what is before you. And sometimes it can be difficult. I mean, I'm still finding my way. There is no rule book to this. There's no manual that says this is how you be a judge. I learned a lot from watching my father and just kind of understanding and watching how he has treated people that have come before him. Some of my mentors from lawyering, and it's funny, I was just having this conversation with my father just yesterday, is to be able to see the bigger picture. A lot of people are very short-sighted, even not just litigants, just even your colleagues or your friends. And being able to communicate is very important. And then also being able to see the bigger picture. So the way I explained it is, if you have a case and you do all of the legwork for the case, but you're not the person that actually tries the case, you have to make sure that you do everything so that that person who's walking in who knows nothing and they're picking up your file can pick it up, know that everything is done so that they can be successful at what they're doing. That requires you to be able to see the end game, not just each little step before you. So I have brought that into my judging, in that where are we going and how are we going to get there? Because if you just do step by step by step, every time the parties come back is, and one more thing, and this happened, and this, and this isn't going to work, and we tried this for years. So it's like, okay, where are we going? And we need a roadmap of how we're going to get there, so you know what to expect, what is expected of you, not just me. We all need to have expectations, because again, I can't be here to hold your hand if your child is 2 or 3 until they turn 18. That's not what we're supposed to do. This is your child. You are the one that's supposed to raise them. And all I can help you do is get to a point where you don't need a middle person.
Now, we touched briefly on mentors. Who were some of your mentors coming up outside of your immediate family?
There was a very, very smart attorney, Rose Charles, who I had interned with, and then I worked under her at my first job. And let's see, the last partner that I worked for at my firm before I came here, Greg Katz, he taught a lot about just getting to the point. Let's see, there was James Whalen, who was our trial attorney, and he was the one who told me about seeing a bigger picture, because he tried all of our cases. So when he would get to trial, it's like, you didn't do this, this wasn't done, or you put these numbers and these numbers are totally off, and now I'm stuck with them. It's like, okay. So those are some of the people that have really helped me along the way.
What would you say to that little girl coming up in Sonia Sotomayor's district who has aspirations of serving as a judge?
I would say is, don't tell yourself no. You don't have to look like anyone else. You don't have to be like anyone else, even if it's your parents. You just have to be you. You have to own it, and you have to not be afraid to be you. You don't have to change yourself for someone else's opinion of what you should be. And never tell yourself no. If you cut yourself off at the door, then you never know what could have happened if you walked through the door. Let them tell you no. And you know what? And when they tell you no, you ask again, or you ask somebody else until you get yes. And if you're consistently getting no's, find another way. There's always another way. And if that particular path is not meant for you, find another way. But never tell yourself no first, because you're taking yourself out of the game before you even stepped into it. And you never know, you just might be that one that walks through the door.
I am Milton Adair Tingling, the son of the Honorable Milton Francis Tingling and Eunice Elizabeth Adair Tingling. I am the middle of the, to our knowledge, only 3-generation African-American family of judges in the history of the nation. Well, I always describe that I'm the product of a mixed marriage. And that is simply that my father's roots are Jamaican and mother's roots are South Carolina, deep South, railroad track South. one side of the other. So when I tell people I'm product of mixed marriage, anybody from the West Indian side, the Caribbean side, anybody from the Southern side completely understands what I'm talking about. My father's parents emigrated from Jamaica in the late 1919s. My grandfather came to this country in 1918 through Ellis Island. Interestingly enough, the records show that there were approximately only 110 to 20,000 Caribbeans that emigrated to America during this period of great migration. My grandfather was one of them. A year later, he sent for my grandmother, who actually sailed from Guantanamo Bay and came through Ellis Island, met her, they married, and in the traditional Caribbean way, he had only met her once before sending for her to come to America to marry. And a year later, my father was born. That was 1920. On my mother's side, we have a written history of our family going all the way back to the end of the Civil War. My great-grandfather, my mother's grandfather, was a runaway slave, and her mother was a child of the master, so light that she could pass for white. And at the end of the Civil War, in 1865, my great-grandmother was approximately 15 years of age. As a child of the master, but still a slave, was freed and was hired as a school teacher in McConnellsville, South Carolina, because she was the only freed slave in town that knew how to read and write. The man that she married, Allen Augustus Jones, had been a companion of his master's son, who was an invalid. And as such, he was exposed to all of the lessons and all of the, let's say, blessings that the son of the master had. My great-grandfather actually spoke German. He was exposed to painting. He was exposed to writing. And what happened was the child, the son of the master, died. And my great-grandfather, who had not known anything else, was going to be returned to the fields. He ran away, and the Civil War started. He ran north and hooked up with Sherman's army and became a camp follower. But unlike stories that may be told and others, blacks were not treated well by the Union Army, those that were runaway slaves. We've seen movies about how black regiments were treated, and they were freedmen, or men that were promised their freedom if they joined the Union Army. So my great-grandfather was treated so bad that the story that was written was he was going back to the plantation, because at least he knew there he would be fed and would have a roof over his head, whatever punishment he was going to suffer. And he made it back to Alabama, I forgot which town, and he was taken in by a Presbyterian minister. And as such, when the war was over, my grandfather actually, on the recommendation of this Presbyterian minister, attended seminary school. And I'm actually in possession of his Bible that from his graduation from seminary school in 1871. So we like to say on the mother side of the family that we come from preachers and teachers. My great-grandfather was a minister. 4 of his sons became ministers. 3 of their sons became ministers. And then 2 of my cousins became ministers. I went to Brown University. I dropped out after my junior year to get married, believing that I would finish here in the city. That didn't work out. And I made a very mature decision when I went up and found out that I wouldn't be graduating. And I decided to not go back to school. And so for the next 2.5 years, I was in the city. I'd gotten a job working at Liberty Mutual Insurance. And for the next 2 years, I partied here in the city. You know, it was a crazy time. And then one day it hit me that if I was going to finish, I needed to go. So I went back and finished and came back to the city and went around, and I bounced around and got a few jobs. I think the last job I had was working for the Internal Revenue Service. But going to our story, in 1976, my father ran for a judgeship for the first time. And I was back in the city, and he had asked me to help him. We really hated politics. I know I hated politics. My father loved politics. He loved everything about it. And another integral person in the three generation stories, Herman Denny Farrell, was the assemblyman for our district and the district leader. And Denny's story was that he was the new kid on the block, and the so-called Harlem royalty, Dinkins, Sutton, Basil Patterson, Fred Samuels, and at the time a man named George Miller, were like, well, who are you? You got nothing to say. And so Denny's attitude was always, well, if you won't let me in, I'll take it over. But in politics, when people don't let you in, what you have to do is you have to run candidates. You have to run yourself and you run candidates. And so the very first candidate that he ran outside of himself was my father. And he ran him for a municipal court judgeship. And the municipal court judgeship ran in a district that, so Denny's assembly district included Esplanade Gardens, but the judicial district did not. If it had included Esplanade Gardens, it was a slam dunk, but it did not. And so it was a real race. And so we're running against the powers that be. And it was very much a family operation. You know, you start finding out about your mother's friends that own beauty parlors on 145th Street that you never knew about. And you're standing on the streets and you're getting signatures and you're doing petitions and you're learning about the process. And incredibly in that race, we ended up losing by approximately 200 votes. And I never forget that night, because it was, I'm telling the story because it was a lesson about in the judgeships and politics. I'll never forget that night. My father's opponent was a man named Thomas Sinclair. And we lived on 158th Street in Riverside, and Sinclair literally lived around the block on 159th Street in Riverside. And the night that we lost, we're at the table at the house, and we know we lost, and it's very emotional. And my father comes walking out of the bedroom dressed in his best Sunday. You know, I mean, he's decked out. And we're like, well, where are you going? And he said he was going around the corner to congratulate Sinclair. And I know that I was extremely upset, because I'm like, after everything we just went through, you going around there congratulating him or whatnot? And I remember my father told me, he said, you need to understand something. If you're a black man and you're running for a judgeship, there are very few districts or opportunities for you to run in. And the odds are 99-1 that you will be running against another black person, and it will be somebody that you know and that you have known and that's been a friend of yours for 30 or 35 years, because that's the way it is. And to be honest with you, I didn't understand it that night. I've certainly come to understand it since, but I did not understand it that night. I was always involved with, in high school with black movements and liberations and student movements and this, that, and the other, and the head of Black Student Association and all of that. And yet, when I was in college, I had gone to Texas with one of my roommates, and his parents had a great big house, and they had a boat, went down to Texas and all this. I remember telling my father, damn, Dad, why didn't you move, why didn't you move to South Carolina with Mom? We could have had a big house and all this. And he looked at me and he said, well, they were hanging black people down there and black lawyers, so I thought it might not be a good idea. Now here I am, Mr. Revolutionary, right, asking this stupid ass question of my father. So my father was 62 when he was elected. When I was elected, I was 43. When Asia was elected, she was 38. And not yet a parent, which is another big thing. It's differences and experience and other things. But my rule about judging is what I do, it's not what I am. Going to your question about that transition, I think that Asia really hit it on the head. As a lawyer, you are an advocate for your client and for that position. Even if it may not be popular, quite frankly, half the time it may not be tenable, okay? But as a judge, you're never divorced from your feelings. But the difficult part of it is not exhibiting those feelings when you're on the bench and knowing that you have to listen.
Then 2 years later, my father ran again, 1978, and his two opponents were a gentleman named Henry Williams and someone you may have heard of, Bruce Wright. Interestingly enough, the winner of the race was Henry Williams. Henry Williams had been Adam Clayton Powell's personal lawyer. And Henry at the time was 66 years old, and he had been a long-time solo practitioner, and he wanted this judgeship, right? It was the end of his career, because under the Constitution of the state of New York, all judges must retire at age 70. So Henry wins, my father loses, Bruce loses, and 4 years later, Henry has to leave because he hit 70. So Henry's seat is up, and at this time, now he had a district seat. Now my father runs again in 1982. In 1979, after bouncing around, and Asia was born in 1978, and I was working for the Transit Authority, and something happened, and I decided to hell with this, and I was going to law school, and packed up Asia. I think how old were you, 14 months maybe?
I wasn't born yet.
Oh, okay. Packed her mother up in a rider truck, sold everything we weren't taking, and drove to Durham, North Carolina to go to North Carolina Central University School of Law. We spent the first 2 nights in the truck because, interestingly enough, North Carolina would take a personal check, even another check from another state, but they wouldn't take a personal check that didn't have your address on it. And in those days, you didn't have your address on a personal check in case you lost it and came home to find visitors. Okay, so my father had a friend in Raleigh. I drove the truck to Raleigh. He cashed a check for me, and 2 days later, we had an apartment. That was the beginning of that. And then fast forward to 1982, my father runs again. Now, he's running for a countywide, not a district seat. And so Henry Williams, who had won 4 years before, he now has to leave. He's 70. And his seat is now won by a man named Milton Richardson, longtime Harlemite, Lenox Terrace, Riverton. One of the only people I know. He lived for the Riverton in 20 years and then moved to Lenox Terrace and lived there 20 years. But in 1982, I also graduated from law school. I came back to the city. I wanted to stay in North Carolina. I had done very well in law school and had made friends, and it was a great opportunity. But my father was running and asked me to come back to New York to help. I couldn't tell him no. So I came back, and I remember I was driving a cab, and I had decided I wouldn't look for a legal job because I figured I was going to flunk the bar, and I didn't want to have a job and then take it again in February while I was working. So we worked. We did the campaign. Denny Farrell now was the district leader and actually told my father that he couldn't support him, okay, because of the politics. He couldn't support him. But my father always wanted to be a judge, period, from the time I could remember. He always wanted to be a judge, and he was never going to stop. In 1982, my father was 62 years old, so even if he won, he only had 8 years left on the bench. Interesting story. So we go to the convention, and there are two seats. So one of the seats, you have to win more than 50% of the delegates. So one of the seats is a woman, and she wins. So now it's the other seat, and there are three candidates. So there are two candidates. One of them gets 46%, the other one gets 40-something%. No winner. They do round two. That's like 44-44. No winner. They do it again. Nobody gets 50%. So now they've done 3 rounds. So Denny Farrell, who's now the county leader, goes and says, listen, if you can't have your candidate, who would you accept? And both of them said, well, Milt Tingling's a great guy. And lo and behold, my father, without the support of the county leader, without all of that, he gets the judgeship. To his surprise, damn sure to my surprise, I remember being at the convention going, what happened? What just happened? I didn't understand politics all that well then.
Well, and to Grandma's relief.
And to my grandmother's relief. Because at that point, she was no longer able to go out and support him in the same way, which is physically, to go out and support the campaign in the same way. But my father wanted to be a judge. And so now he was a judge. The mayor was Edward Irving Koch. I believe the election was May 7th, and he swore him and Milton Richardson and the other judge in the next day. And so they were already presiding. So in December, my father wanted to have his induction ceremony. I'll never forget, it was December 9th, 1982. I was driving a cab. I came to my parents' house for lunch. I went to the mailbox and looked inside, and there was an envelope from the state bar examiners, and to my still disbelief, it said I passed the bar. So, of course, I told my father, and that night went to the induction, and my father's, receiving his congratulations and telling everybody, oh, that's my son, yeah, he passed the bar, he needs a job. It's my son, he passed the bar, he needs a job. So, yeah. So anyway, I ended up interviewing with Milton Richardson, and I was hired by Milton Richardson. My whole intent was still to return to North Carolina, especially since now my father had his judgeship. So I went to work for Milton Richardson. He and his wife Margaret did not have children. Interesting enough, his wife Margaret was one of the first black female teachers in New York City. Yeah, from Mobile, Alabama.
All right.
Yeah, and so then I stayed. We formed a good relationship. A year goes by, then another year goes by, then another year goes by, and I'm like, why am I not back in North Carolina? I don't know, but that was the story. But then in 1987. My father passed away. And it was different because at this point, being a lawyer, being in the field, now I still wasn't dealing with politics because I hated politics. But if I had any questions or issues, I had him to go to. And now I didn't. Asia and I actually share something. She talked about being pressured. I had no intentions of becoming a lawyer. One of the things when you grow up in a family where your parents or grandparents are lawyers, you either are drawn towards it like a magnet or you are repelled from it. Okay, like it's the worst thing in the world. So had no intentions. And I was working for the Transit Authority when Asia was born, and I was very happy. It was great, man. We got paid every week, ride the subways and buses for free and everything. And there was an incident. Someone filed a complaint, something, whatever. And the process, they found me guilty, and I got 3 days in the street, which is 3 days with no pay. And I will never forget to this day, I was so angry that I went home that night and filled out applications for law school that had been sitting in my drawer for 2 years and sent them out. I was elected to civil court in 1996 to the 7th Municipal District and was the first black ever elected to that municipal district, which has existed since the formation of New York City. In 2000, I was elected to the New York State Supreme Court and presided there for 14 years. In 2014, I was reelected to a second 14-year term. 7 weeks later, I retired. And I retired from the position because I was offered an appointment as the county clerk of New York County, which others will know as Manhattan. As the county clerk of New York County, the commissioner of jurors for New York County, and the clerk of court for Supreme Court, both civil and criminal divisions. And people have asked, why would you leave a judge to become a clerk? And my answer is always, I didn't leave a judgeship to become a clerk. I retired from a judgeship to become the clerk. Upon accepting the appointment, I became the first and only black county clerk in the history of New York State. The state, a state which is comprised of 62 counties and is 232 years old. I also became the first black commissioner of jurors in the history of New York State, along with the first black clerk of court for Supreme and criminal divisions in the history of New York State. I am very proud to share that since that, I am no longer the only black commissioner of jurors, as my sister, the Honorable Dr. Betty Campbell, became the first black female commissioner of jurors for Westchester County. One of my big issues with judges, those that have never had any practice outside of being in a courtroom and just seeing attorneys and dealing with papers, is that you don't have enough experience to deal with people. And courts are supposed to be about people, and to be honest with you, we're moving away from that. It's becoming so much more digital and paper and geared only to those that can afford it. Knowing that you have to listen. Judges have incredible amounts of discretion, and there are many ways to massage cases and results. So many ways to do it legally. The thing to do is to allow yourself to be who you are, but remember, in that role, you are a judge.
So one thing I'll just say is that as a judge, you have to have tough skin. You can't take everything personally. A lot of people have, I would say litigants in general, have a huge misconception about court. A lot of litigants are afraid to come to court. Any court, because of what what you see on TV, what you hear, what your friends, what their friends tell them, and just a general lack of understanding of how it works. And even just walking into a building can be extremely frightening. And sometimes, lawyers can take on the personality of their clients. One of the things I find is that, as my father said, you have to learn to listen. And sometimes when litigants come in, they have it's like a set speech that they're going to say. And regardless of whatever's going to happen, I'm going to go in and I'm going to tell the judge this, and I'm going to tell them X, Y, Z, and this is what's happened to me, and I'm going to have my day, and I'm going to be heard. And then there are days when it's like, okay, no problem. What is it that you want? No, you don't understand, And I'm like, okay, I'm asking, what is it that you want? You want this? No problem. I'll give it to you. No, because that's not because it's like that's not the response that they were expecting. And sometimes when they're hyped up like that, their lawyers get hyped up. And then it is very easy to feel when you are sitting up there, because you are sitting up there by yourself. You don't have a co-counsel to tell you, calm down, take a break. You don't have a co-counsel to say, say this, say that. It's just you. It is very easy to almost internalize that as if, am I doing something wrong? Why are you yelling at me? Calm down. Or even the attorneys to do that when you make a decision that they don't like. So one of the things when we talk about temperament is to be able to articulate your decision in a way that they understand, so that even if it is objectionable, they don't like it, it doesn't go their way, that when they walk out, they have some understanding of why you did what you did. And I think that is one of the biggest issues, especially when it comes to temperament. Judges have a lot of discretion. They also have a lot of power. And I'm not talking about the type of power that we generally speak of, the almighty, but you are making decisions about people's lives. You can hold people accountable for not following your orders that you are making about their life. These are strangers coming to you, and you are making decisions about their lives. So one of the things when you talk about temperament, you cannot internalize how they're behaving. You can correct it or manage it, and that comes down from how you set the tone. Because if someone's yelling at you, and they're getting a little out of character, and then you now match that energy, you have basically it's almost like you just took the robe off and like, hey, let's go out in the street and fight. So that's one of the things that is very difficult, is to still be able to listen to all of that anger, the pain, the frustration, and the general lack of understanding of how this system works. I think if people have more of an understanding of how it worked, whether we're explaining it to them, not giving legal advice, but explaining it to them, and that their lawyers are better explaining it to them, they will probably be there'll be a little more, I guess, order to things, a little less mess. I deal more with litigants here because they are required, this is family court, and they are required to be present at each appearance, whereas in other courts, you really don't see the actual parties. You deal mostly with the attorneys. And one of the things my father talked about is experience. Having life experience makes a very big difference in when you're listening to what people are saying. You can kind of figure out how they got here, whatever the underlying issue. Not that you can fix it, but now you have more of a roadmap of, if I can understand how you got here, I can kind of try to help you get out of this place to where you could be, if you're willing to do that. So having life experience is very, very important. Being on the bench, seeing different things, being around various types of people, traveling, all of those things contribute to how you conduct your courtroom and how you make your decisions. And it also goes to your temperament, because if it's something that you have seen before, experienced before, or someone who's experienced something like that, you may be less likely to exhibit certain behaviors when you're sitting there, which again goes to temperament. It's almost like with a child. If your child is hollering and screaming and having a tantrum, if you're matching that energy is going to stay there. If your child is hollering and screaming and you start talking to them in effect, I need you to calm down, we're going to count to 3. Now they got to try to pay attention, and then they will start to bring it down, so now you can have a conversation about what we're going to do here.
I had a case having to do with licenses, vendor licenses in the city parks. The city came up with a new program where they were only going to issue so many of them, okay? And it really became like an old Western. You had people lined up at 6 o'clock in the morning, getting ready to race to park department headquarters in the different parks to try and get these 100 vendor licenses for 5 different city parks: Highline, Central Park, Brooklyn Army Plaza, 14th Street.
It was insane. But I got the case and I ruled in favor of the city. So when I got the I got the so-called soda ban case, I asked them if they wanted me to recuse myself. And the city thinking, well, he ruled in favor of the city before, we're going to keep him. Because I was not a life member of the NAACP, but I was a member of the NAACP, which was one of the litigants. And I went on record. I said, you guys want me to accuse myself? Everyone's like, oh, no, 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 no.
The large soda you see here was just a day away from becoming illegal in New York City. But not the big gulp at the 7-Eleven. Confused? So was Manhattan Supreme Court Justice Milton Tingling. In a 37-page ruling, Tingling called Mayor Michael Bloomberg's soda ban arbitrary with too many loopholes. Tingling said the rule couldn't be implemented without the approval of New York City Council. Bloomberg insists the Board of Health has the power to enforce the ban. He vowed to appeal.
My thinking about it was this, and part of it is a legal explanation. It was, I told you before, I hated politics. Something happened along the way. I found out that I was good at it. It's bad. And it was all politics, and it was being done in a way that I just can't agree with, okay? Perfect example. There had been the smoking ban, okay? The smoking regulations. It went through the regular process. It was voted on by the city council. What Bloomberg did was he was trying to institute the soda ban without ever going to the city council, without ever going to the people, without it ever coming up for a vote. What he did is that he had the health board, which consisted of 80% of all of the members of the board were appointed by him. And what they were doing was they were declaring sugar-related illness and obesity to be what now is such a familiar term, to be a pandemic, to be a health crisis. Now, I'm diabetic. I understand the sugar in amounts is not good for you, and it leads to other things. Okay, illness, death, obesity, heart attacks, whatever you want to, whatever it leads to. I understand that. It wasn't that I was against there being some form of it. I was against what he did and how he attempted to do it. And so they actually had a poll, and they sent out, people weigh in on what you think about this proposed new law. There was something like 11,000 people wrote in, and lo and behold, 8,000 of them were in favor of it. I mean, give me a break. And the biggest thing about it was he had not gone through the right, in my way, my rule procedure. He went around the council. It was his board. They were all his appointees. And as you just said, if he could do this, why not French fries? Why not peas? Why not open-toed sandals? Why not anything if you designate it as a pandemic? I did the research. You're talking about pandemics. You're talking about the Black Plague. You're talking about bubonic plague. You're talking about scarlet fever. Okay? To me, that's where the health department, I have no issue, legally or morally, okay, in terms of, oh no, you step in. Yeah, follow the science. Okay, but here, it was a pure political get around. And so I did the research. I had wonderful help from my interns and my law clerk at the time. Did the research. And the thing probably that made it as big as it was that it had gone so far, there was no expectation that it was not going to be law on the day that it was scheduled to become law. And I issued my decision at 5 minutes to 5, the day before it was going to become law. All of the restaurants and all of the franchises, they'd already ordered cups. People don't understand. You could not have gone to a restaurant and gotten a 14-ounce glass of water under this law. In addition, 7-Eleven could still sell big gulps, but a bodega could not sell a 16-ounce soda. There was no rhyme or reason. There was no rationality to the way it was being implemented. And yet, had I not made that decision, that's exactly what would have happened. That's exactly what would have happened. And so I issued the decision. It went it went far bigger than anything I expected. I mean, I got people sent me newspapers from all over the world. Aruba, you know, it was front page headlines and everything. One of the most interesting things about it is that I got letters telling me this is the greatest thing in the world. I got them from right-wing racist anarchists, and I got them from left-wing revolutionary progressives, because they had something in common. They both hate government. And to them, this was like, you shot down government. I still have the letters. I always found it fascinating that you had these two totally polar opposite groups, and they all thought that I had just done such a great thing.
I don't know. I want her to just follow her own path. If this is where her path leads her, that's fine. But I just want her to do something else. You know, I don't know.
Milt, I understand Marcus is in law school.
Totally against my wishes. What did I tell him? I said, if you're going to go to dental school, damn it.
Do something else.
Do something else, man. There's enough lawyers in this family. But, you know, it appears to be his passion. So, you know, he supported. I definitely did not push him towards it. And I object to Asia saying I pushed her towards it. I definitely did. My friends did, without question. My friends, oh my God. Yeah, even I'd cringe every day in the car. Yeah, they definitely pushed her towards the law thing. It's very interesting because I don't think that either my father and certainly not myself ever thought that, I know he didn't think that I would end up pursuing the law. I didn't go to law school until I was 26, got almost 27. And it's interesting, the journey between graduating high school and finishing law school is 11 years. For my father, it was 16 years. And then, you know, slightly shorter for Asia. But I think that those periods of time don't so much lead you. Well, like I said, my father always wanted it. I don't think it so much leads you there, but when you get there, I think the greatest asset, I know for us and family in terms of going to law school, has been that we didn't go straight through. Those things certainly saved me from flunking out of law school, and then sustained me in being successful in law school, you know, eventually. So I agree what Asia talked about, you know, with my mother about, you know, experience is so important. It's so important, and I think that it makes you a better judge. Times have changed from the time that her grandfather was a judge. Even when he became a judge, there was more of a respect or even a perception of not the omnipotence of judges, but of the power of judges. Today, there's much more an attitude of confronting judges. You have to understand, you may have a third-year associate, 3 years out of law school, that makes more money than you do. You know, they don't look on you with the same amount of respect that is deserving. My father, your grandfather, was old school. You know, in the middle of an argument or something, he might look down at a female attorney and go, "Listen, girlie." Yeah. You know, and when he did it back then, might catch yourself, "Oh, I'm sorry, I apologize." Whereas today, it'll be front page news. You know, there'll be a lawsuit, there'll be an investigation, there'll be all of this. That was the nature of the times.
When I started, I mean, the hardest judges on female attorneys were female judges. Don't be a female attorney and come in with your shoulders bare in front of a female judge. Oh my God, excoriated. I mean, you would be blasted. You would get a whole history lesson of everything they went through, you know, to get there. One of the things that I'm most proud about, and I wanted to share this also, that my father always wanted to be a judge, but I found out something after he had passed. When I was first elected, there was a man, Mr. Stevens, who had been a longtime member of my uncle and aunt's church that Asia referred to that started the daycare center. And he had a printing company in Harlem, and he was printing up the invitations to the induction. And he was so proud and so happy, and I gave him the first invitation. You know, he had printed. And he told me a story that no one had ever told me. And the story was that it was my grandfather, my father's father's dream, that immigrant from Kingston, that it was his dream that his children, grandchildren, would become lawyers and judges. And I never heard that story before. And I remember feeling, well, you know, really warm and proud, first of all, that he's telling me this story, that I'd done something that I never thought of. But I can tell you for certain that at that time there was no plan or thought about any of my children becoming lawyers, much less judges. This opportunity for Asia, which she got to, really is based on everything that was ever done. Going back to my grandfather, and certainly her grandfather, and all of his disappointments and roadblocks and obstacles that he had to face and overcome, and then certainly my own, but they weren't done in order to reach where we are now. You do things, you're a parent, you know, I know you're proud of your children. You do things that you think are best to provide opportunities for them, not knowing what path they're going to take or what they'll do with those opportunities. But that's what you do. And when it turns out like this, we look and we constantly ask, you know, do you know anybody else? Anybody? Any of the 3-generation African-American black family of judges in the history of this country? And there are people out there that research it because they want to be sure. There are people out there that research it because they're proud of being associated with this legacy. And we have not gotten anybody to come and say that we're not.